Okay then, hi, good morning again. Let me introduce myself. I'm Rose Zoltek-Jick, and I am the Associate Director of CRRJ, and a longtime professor here at Northeastern in the law school. But most relevantly here, I am the second teacher at CRRJ, the second clinical teacher in the program, doubling the staff from Professor Burnham to just then the two of us. And then we brought on Melvin Kelly, who I think I saw in the room, but he may be out in the hall at the moment, and then to Katie Sanson and Raymond Wilkes, and we have grown the program, the clinical part of the program, the student part of the program, to produce really what we are celebrating here today. We've just had an unbelievable first panel on archives. Whoa, let's give them another round of applause. And what we're going to be doing in this panel on pedagogy is pulling back the curtain yet one more level, bringing back the question of how that hamburger gets made, because actually an archive is nothing if it doesn't have something to collect, if it doesn't have evidence to draw on and to organize. And what this panel is about is how the CRRJ archive and other archives that resemble ours and that are linked to our broader nature of work, what we do in terms of using students. And because the secret sauce, really the key to every piece of archival data that has been recorded in CRRJ's archive, is as a result of student labor. Not, we hope, student exploitation, but rather student labor. And last night we celebrated the folks who helped build the archive, and there are about 350 participants who contributed the material that is now in the CRRJ archive. It's really kind of extraordinary. Primarily it was Northeastern law students, but it wasn't just Northeastern law students. It was students from journalism here at Northeastern. It was students from public history here at Northeastern. It was also our collaborators in the South in our partner institution at Southern University Law Center in Baton Rouge. It was also undergraduate institutions, Penn State and Vassar. It was even high school students at Cambridge Ringe and Latin across the river in Cambridge. And it was lawyers at Morgan Lewis who worked with us pro bono, who helped us also build the archive. It took 350 hands to produce the almost 1,000 cases, almost 20,000 documents that now comprise the CRRJ Burnham Nobles archive. Last night we celebrated the students. Today we're celebrating the archive, but this particular panel is also now ready to examine and reflect and describe what the pedagogic methodologies that we've used and the questions that arise from how do you teach in the context of doing investigatory work. This experiential modality has to be questioned. We have to celebrate everything we've done, but we also have to subject it to rigorous, critical examination, even as we celebrate everything that we've achieved in the result. We have to look at the process of how, in fact, those investigations are conducted and how we lead responsibly students through that process. Now, here at Northeastern, in terms of our archive, in terms of the CRRJ archive, we have a sort of a unique piece of the world of investigation of racial violence, and that's because, of course, we're based at a law school. So that in addition to wanting to document the killing, in addition to wanting also to unearth and remember, as Monica Martinez so eloquently put it, remember the victim and humanize and remember the victim, we are uniquely interested in the legal sequelae. We are interested in the question of what happened afterwards, and afterwards with respect to public justice. So what we are particularly interested in, what our archive sort of uniquely brings to the world of archives in this area, is the question of what happened with respect to the justice system. Where did the justice system act? And in fact, where did it not act? Where was there the presence of public justice? And more often, of course, where was the absence of public justice and therefore impunity? Because the absence of public justice means that there is essentially impunity for the perpetrators, and that is essentially what our archive has documented. So this panel is going to be an examination of the creation of the history, the uncovering, the unearthing of the history, or the restoring of the history, because in fact, the act of creating an archive is itself an act of restorative justice. Creating an archive, unearthing that history, restoring history is in fact a part of restorative justice. And so what we're going to be doing is examining how we did that, how the panelists here assembled do that in their work, and what one does when one realizes that public justice has no longer been possible, and you have to turn to principles and theories and practices of restorative justice and transformative justice to make up for the absence of public justice. So let me introduce our panel. Like Gina, I'm going to say use that scan thing in the program to read their full bios because they're pretty darn impressive. But what I want to do is just basically say we have 3 panelists up here that are going to try to introduce for you some of the questions around how one teaches students alongside with using them to build the archive. And what does it mean to teach in the context of investigation? And what does it mean to teach in the context of historic investigation? What does it mean to basically do this kind of experiential modality with the consciousness of restorative history in mind? So we have Katie Sanson from our own Northeastern clinic here at the law school. We have Ada Goodloe from Southern University. I've previously mentioned our partner in the South in Baton Rouge. And then our outlier, the non-lawyer who teaches undergraduates. We have the famous Hank Klibanoff joining us from Emory University. There's going to be a lot of compare and contrast. And the way that we're going to run the panel is as follows. I'm going to ask all 3 of them to briefly introduce their programs so that you know the whats and the hows, so that we have a bit of a context for the later conversations around the whys. What we'd like to do is have all of them 3 in the order that I just suggested, talk about how the program at their institution is run, how they engage students, and then we'll step back for some questions that I'll moderate, and then open it up, God willing, for the last 10 minutes for questions from the audience. Okay? With that, Katie.
Of course. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Katie Sanson, and I am a member of our teaching team here at the CRRJ clinic at Northeastern. And I use that word deliberately because we really are a team of instructors here. And I have been so fortunate to have the opportunity to co-teach and to be mentored by Professor Burnham, Professor Zoltek-Jick, my colleague Raymond Wilkes, who is not here today, but maybe on the webcast. And I feel really grateful to have the opportunity to represent the work that all of us do together at CRRJ in the classroom, because that educational mission really is at the heart of what we do at CRRJ. So I'm going to do my best to do the nuts and bolts of the CRRJ clinic as quickly and efficiently as I can. CRRJ does offer a number of different experiential learning and educational opportunities. We have internships, we have co-ops, we have a few different courses, but in this conversation, I'm really going to focus on the CRRJ clinic, which is sort of the primary vehicle through which we work with students. So the CRRJ clinic, we're an experiential course offered primarily to law students through the law school, but also to other graduate students, mostly in the journalism and media advocacy programs, but not exclusively. It is a 15-week course in its current iteration, previously 11 weeks prior to Northeastern Law changing its calendar system. We offer it 1 semester per year. Typically, it usually has somewhere between 12 to 14 students. Again, mostly law students, usually 1 or 2 from the other graduate programs. We do teach the course generally in pairs of co-instructors, which I think is really important because it allows us to bring different perspectives and experiences into the classroom, and also allows our fellows to gain teaching experience. And the course has 2 main components. The first is the classroom component, which is essentially a 2-hour weekly seminar. In that course, students engage with readings from a range of different fields, including history, law. We provide sort of context on the historical period, context on the law, the remedies that would have been available at the time, how the laws evolved and how those laws look different in the present. So thinking about what the legal aftermath might be if the same facts happened today and how we got from there to here. And we also talk about restorative justice, transitional justice. We provide sort of an academic foundation in those concepts. The second component of the clinic is the casework. So students spend about 20 hours per week investigating a docket of 3 to 5 cases. Each student has their own individual docket, but they also are put into groups, so they work together, they meet weekly, they problem solve together with one another and with the instructors. Sometimes they'll also work on other research projects to support some of the other initiatives and things that we have going on at CRRJ outside of the casework, but the casework is typically the focus of the student work. And then finally, I'll say that by the end of the semester, students produce summaries of each of their cases. They produce a really in-depth essay on one of their cases, and they have the opportunity to present at what we call the grand rounds, where they present their cases to a panel of experts in law and history and other fields, and get feedback and critiques that they're able to incorporate into their final essay. And so all of the documents they collect, the case summaries, the final essay, all of that goes into the archive. And so when we say we would not have an archive without the students, that is a very truthful statement. And so I think I will leave it there for now and let Ada take over.
Good morning. My name is Ada Goodloe Lampkin, and I'm the director of the Lewis A. Berry Institute for Civil Rights and Justice at the Southern University Law Center, accepting donations of blankets or anything that will keep me warm. Our program, oh, thank you. No, you're cold too. Okay. We're cold together because we're from the South. So Katie did a wonderful job of talking about what they do at the clinic, and we've absolutely tried to do something similar, but during the summer. So our program actually started when Professor Burnham reached out to our chancellor, John K. Pierre, in late 2013, and in the summer of 2014, we actually had the first summer, and it was a fellowship at the time. And I was actually a law student at Southern University, and this was an opportunity that came across my email, and it was the only opportunity that I said, oh, I have to do this. And I know that many other students from Southern University feel the same way. We are an HBCU law school. Our system is an HBCU, the only HBCU system in the country, and so we cater to students from the South that are predominantly African American. And so it's been a very different, and I'll like to talk about those differences now, but the design of the summer program is a lot similar to the clinic. So everything that Katie said, divide in half, and that's what we do. We do have about 20 hours of work that we require our students to complete, and they get a public service stipend for that. And I introduced that into the conversation because we classify this work as a public service. And our students get to go on to other things, having this public service experiential learning as their foundation. And they do amazing, amazing things. So we teach about, and I want to say this has changed a bit. When it started, it was 4 law school students and 4 undergraduates. We also split the program between Baton Rouge and Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi. Since then, we have done a few iterations of that, but typically we are primarily interested in having our law school students do these case investigations. So for 20 hours a week, 2 of those hours are spent in conversation, reviewing readings that have been assigned. And I would be remiss to not bring Raymond back into the conversation, because Raymond has been central and integral to making this a successful program at Southern University Law Center. He is the primary instructor. He is the one that decides which cases they should review, which articles they should read, in what order. And because of that, our students have consistently had a similar experience during the summer program. We cover the same period that they cover. So when we started out, we were in the 40s and 50s, and now we are in, I think, the 50s, 60s, 70s.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
you all have moved a
Yeah,
little
we've
later than we
moved.
have.
We've moved a little farther, and I can tell you, when we go further into the conversation, that this program has spawned other programs and other initiatives, and we are working with several people who are interested in replicating this kind of work. And so our students have moved on. The students that have been in our summer program have moved on to other very similar types of initiatives, even with the District Attorney's Office in New Orleans. So we're really, really proud of that, and it is all because of the foundation. It is all because of what has happened in the clinic and the ability to work and partner with and have professors learn, because we are really having to learn from Raymond and Katie and Margaret to make sure that we are staying consistent and delivering the same kind of quality learning experience for our students. At the end of their 6-week program, it's in half, really. They are required to have a written summary and also a paper that they can use, for the rest of their law school career and on. And so we're really proud of that. I think more recently, maybe in the last couple of years, we've focused a lot on their writing, because it's an area for them that requires a great deal of concentration and effort, because this is not just strictly academic, right? This is a lot of emotion that we also have to allow them to process with them. And so at the end, they do have a wonderful product that they can keep with for the rest of their lives, but they also make relationships with families and with other institutions and engage in this work. So it's a continuing thing, but our part of it is a 6-week program for 20 hours a week that our students leave completely different. And I'll pass it to Mr. Hank.
All right.
You bet.
It's a PowerPoint.
Thank you. I'm Hank Klibanoff. It's good to be here with you. This has been a wonderful experience. Beyond this, just in a personal way, I lived in Boston some years. I worked at the Globe from 79 to 82. One of my memories was an election for school board in Boston, and every candidate who won had an Irish name, and they were all African American, including John D. O'Brien, And I'd have to go back, and y'all can double check my history, because I'm gonna qualify and saying I could be misremembering, but I thought, that's wonderful. This is a different Boston. This was post 77 and busing and all, but and Boston was in the midst of a lot of great change, and it's come about in many ways. I'm proud to say I'm the father of a graduate of the Master's in Public History program at the College of Social Sciences and Humanities, right. And was proud to come to her graduation, where she got to deliver the keynote speech, teeing up Governor Dukakis' speech after that. And she now has the privilege, she worked with Giordano, I know she worked with Dean Cohen and others, and I know that she now works with Sion at the National Museum of American History, so I'm very proud of our Caroline Klibanoff. I teach at Emory. I'll tell you what distinguishes our course from what you've heard about. We teach just undergraduates, okay? And these are, class tops out at 16 students. I allocate 4 seats for African American Studies, 4 seats for American Studies, 4 seats for history, and 4 seats for my program, which used to be journalism, but it was slain ignominiously by a boneheaded dean, excuse me, who then left. Good riddance. And now I'm in the creative writing program / nonfiction. Okay, that's an important slash there. I had been working with Professor Burnham on some cases, and with Jerry Mitchell, and with all these people when I left a 36-year career in newspapers. And I was living in Atlanta at the time, and wanting to start a course, the cornerstone of my application for the job at Emory. And was fortunate that they didn't say, you know, we're fine with the way we teach history, okay? Well, let's just keep doing it the way we're doing it. Why do you want to reinvent the wheel? But they didn't say that. They were very open to it. And I was very grateful to people, the late Rudolph Byrd and Natasha Trethewey and others who were on the selection committee who were very good to invite me to join the staff. What we faced then, and it's funny, we haven't had this discussion, we used to have this discussion a lot, is that what we're facing now is that virtually all, now Ben Greenberg back here, who I've had the pleasure of working with, he may want to tell me I'm not exactly right, but if not all, almost all of the perpetrators are dead, okay? And so when this affects a lot of television production. They don't want to talk to you about the why of it. They want to know, can we catch a perpetrator? Can we nail that down, you know? But those days are gone for the most part. But what we have the mandate to do, which is to teach the judgment of history and to allow the judgment of history, to present these cases from the record. And that's why we're so indebted to archivists, by the way. And I will glad to say, I wrote a book a few years ago called The Race Beat, The Press, the Civil Rights Struggle, and the Awakening of a Nation, and co-authored it. And in the acknowledgments, the first set of people, other than my family, who I acknowledge were archivists and special collections librarians, okay? Because I said that the best preservative of history is the writing of it. Historians and journalists have researched and written large and engaging civil rights histories before we tried, and we have built our attempt on their successes. But the writing could never have begun were it not for the commitment of archivists and special collections librarians who understand, as the dean said today, that history not shared is worthless, okay? And that's why I'm so happy that we're doing this today and was appreciative of the first panel. You're wondering when I'm going to get into mine? Okay, here we go. Okay, so I teach this course. It meets once a week for 3 hours. The students, all 16 students, are researching one case. This is not the whodunit. We know who did it, okay, in almost every single case. The record is pretty clear who did it, and we want to research who those people were, but we're not, and we do build a long, extensive timelines for every case about what happened when, and the students learn the value of a timeline in writing a narrative, that if you put down the date of the event, of the killing, as the date that the FBI agent interviewed somebody, you're wrong, right? It's the date of the event, and that's how you build your narrative. And so the students spend a lot of time doing that, spend a lot of time reading secondary literature, secondary history, you know, that people have built on before us. But the point of what they're going to do is to write the why. What were the atmospheric conditions that explain why we were the way we were back in those years of 1948 and 1952 and 1958, 62. So if I might, what do I do here? Just click on this? Yeah, okay. This is our website. You can go to it. I'm 6 years behind on it, okay? It's populated with student pieces. And so you'll see how we treat the incident as theater in the round and write all the circumstances that were surrounding it. All of our cases are from modern civil rights era, so World War II to 68, 70, with one exception. And that was when Ahmaud Arbery was killed in Georgia. We jumped on that because it just resonated and reeked of the history that we had been teaching. I was very fortunate that at some point, WABE, NPR station in Atlanta, came to me and said, we'd like to work with you toward developing a documentary. We talked about it. Finally, we settled on doing a podcast, Buried Truths. And good Lord, it changed my life in ways that I never, ever imagined. And I feel so very fortunate that it did change my life. The first case that we examined actually was a case Northeastern had spent some time on. Isaiah Nixon killed in 1948 in Montgomery County, Georgia, because he voted. That's him on the top left-hand corner. This is him. And Isaiah Nixon was killed by two white men who showed up at his farm in Alston, Georgia, and after he had voted. It was only the second time in Georgia history that blacks had the chance to vote in the Democratic Party, in a primary, the Democratic Party primary. And thanks to a very courageous man named Primus King of Columbus, Georgia. These white men said, Nixon, did you vote today? And he said, well, I reckon I did. They said, well, who'd you vote for? And he didn't say Herman Talmadge. He said the other guy. And they said, well, come go for a ride with us. Well, he knew probably that earlier in the day, the man who had gotten him into all this voting idea was the head of the NAACP, and we'll tell you more about him in a minute, Dover Carter, and that they had beat up Dover Carter that afternoon as he was shuttling blacks to the polls. And so he probably knew that, and they said, come go with us. We want to take you for a ride. Now, he knew these two white men. He'd grown up with them. As his mother said, we had them in our house for lunch growing up, okay? So he said, I'm not going with you. And one of them had a gun out, and he shot him 3 times. And he died. Several days later, they had to take him 2 counties away, Lawrence County, to find a hospital that would take a black man, and that's where he died. The Pittsburgh Courier took up this case like, wow, they just really went after it. Jessie Vann, who inherited the newspaper from her late husband, put a lot of resources into it, sent reporters down to cover it. This is a photograph of the family after, in the days after Isaiah Nixon was killed. The woman in the top right-hand corner, the then 6-year-old, 7-year-old Dorothy, she became our guide throughout this whole story. And she is the voice of the podcast. His widow is right here in the center holding the baby, 2-week-old Isaiah Jr. On the left is his mother. And I'm happy to say that his widow lived until 95 years old, I think. And on her 94th birthday, we were able to give her a copy of this photograph that was at North Carolina Central University Archives. Northeastern, like I said, went down there, one of the law students, and at this time, let me tell you that when they buried Isaiah Nixon at this cemetery, the family fled in 1948, and they didn't feel like it was safe to come back. By the time they felt it was safe, they go to the cemetery, they cannot find his gravesite. It has sunk, okay, and it's gotten grown over, and weeds and a gnarly old limb had fallen on it. I mean, they came back every year to clean the cemetery and walked it and never found the gravesite. And I happened to have invited Dorothy, now in her 70s, and then in her 70s, from Jacksonville, to come up and with her, and she came with her daughter, and they came to my class, and 3 of my students said, we're ready to go now. Let's go down to Montgomery County. Let's go to the cemetery. I said, there's plenty of time. We're going to take a field trip. They said, we're going today, or we're going Friday. I said, all right, I'll drive, you know. And so we went down there, and I'm telling you, we were not at the cemetery for 3 minutes before the students are fanning out, and all of a sudden you hear one of my students, Ellie Studdard, yell out, I found it. I kept walking with this man who was taking us there because I didn't want to break his concentration on showing me where his mom and dad died. But in fact, she had found that it was off to the side, and that slab of cement you see in front of the headstone was completely covered. The headstone had nothing on it. It's not that it was weather worn. It just never had the name etched on it because it's all on the slab, okay? And it had sunk and gotten grown over, but she had to be standing there looking down at it, and I don't know if it was a pounding rain or something had cleared a small little area, and she saw an I that had been etched with a finger in wet cement in 1948. And then she saw an S, and she said, this can't possibly be it. And then she's on her hands and knees, and she clears out, she sees S-E-P. She knows he died September 8th, 1948. And that's when she yelled, I found it. And sure enough, we went over there. I'm not going to be able to play you this audio right now, the video, but we're going to come back to it. And found Isaiah Nixon's gravesite. We were able to call his daughter. And I said, Dorothy, any chance you FaceTime? She says, well, yeah. I said, oh, good, because I don't know how, you know. And so my students had to show me how. Let me just tell you the other thing about this is Dover Carter. I told you the NAACP chairman who really got this whole thing going. I got to know his family very well. He was beat up so badly that he took his 10 children and his wife. And his wife was the child of the largest black landowner in this county. They were leaving a lot. And they moved to Philadelphia. Some of you who are in Philadelphia will know this family because they have been on the, if I say the streets, don't misunderstand me, on the streets selling fruits and vegetables in West Philadelphia for decades, okay, prospered. They've got a very prospering business in Philadelphia. And, I'm going to actually just, they invited me to the family reunion back in Georgia in 2017, and then I'm going to play you a clip here of this man right there, Aaron Carter, now in his 70s, who was 7 years old when he remembers coming upon his dad on the side of the road, so badly beaten that he had to be taken inside the house and treated, and then get medical attention, and then get on that train to Philadelphia. Now, can I play this? Will this work? Baptist Church in Mount Vernon, Georgia. It's a sweet country church with a small cemetery behind it. And as we walk to the gravesite of his parents, Dover and Bessie Carter, a chorus of crickets and cicadas greet us. Now, Dover Carter may have fled Alston in fear, but Aaron says his dad always wanted to be buried back in Georgia.
He always wanted to be here. He's where he wanted to be.
Dover Carter lived to age 81, almost 40 years after that fateful election day. And his wife, Bessie, well, looking at her headstone, I was able to do some fast arithmetic, and I smiled. She was born in the year 1910, and she died in 2009. My goodness, she lived 99 years. But wait, this gets better. I need to tell you that in the time I've spent with the families of Isaiah Nixon and John Harris and Dover Carter, I've noticed many strong and similar threads. They believe deeply in God. Education is the ticket to a worthy and worthwhile life. And nothing should ever keep them from voting on Election Day. It's remarkable to learn that Bessie Carter lived long enough to cast her ballot for a black man for president, Barack Obama.
Oh, I think one of the proudest minutes of her life. I can imagine now that, looking back, when she wasn't allowed to even to vote, and then now she's voting for a black man. It was the crowning part, I think, of her life.
Barack Obama was inaugurated on January 20th, 2009. Bessie Carter would die 5 days later. Quickly, another case, A.C. Hall, 1962. White woman calls the police and says, I've seen a black man, colored man getting out of my husband's car, and we've noticed that his handgun is missing from the glove compartment. This is in Macon. At the same time, the police swing by and pick up the white couple and drive them around to look for a man with a gun. I can't imagine taking the people with them, the police, but that's what they did. A.C. Hall, 17, happens to have been at a nightclub that night for a teen night and meets his girlfriend, Eloise, and they go for a walk, and they happen to be kind of nuzzling together at this George Washington Carver Middle School when the police car comes up and the headlights go on A.C. Hall, and the white woman says, that's him there. And AC starts to run. AC was not the guy in the car. AC did not steal the gun. There's no disputing that, including from the chief of police, the white chief of police and down there. I'm not going to play you the sound of my interview with the woman who identified him because I don't have time, but you can listen to the podcast, I guess. But I do want to play you something here. An interview with the son of one of the policemen, okay? And let me tell you something we found out in Georgia. This extraordinary privilege that was built into the Georgia law decades ago, that if you were a police officer and you were charged with a crime, particularly a murder, including murder, okay, you got to show up and appear before the coroner's jury. You got to hear all the testimony against you. You got to listen to all the testimony against you in the grand jury. And then you got to give the last word, the closing speech on your own behalf without being sworn in and without being cross-examined. And that law lasted on the books until 2016. Okay, so this explains why so many police officers were able to get off for so many decades. But I just want you to hear this great moment, I think, with the son of one of the policemen who's going to have to reckon with something that I have to reveal to him about what happened. And what happened was that the medical examiner walked into the coroner's inquest and handed a report that defied the explanation of the police. The police said, as A.C. Hall was running, this is like Laquan McDonald, he pulled out a gun and he turned and he was firing. And the medical examiner report says he was shot dead in the back, that there was no turning around, okay? So just bear with me as I play this one other clip.
My dad was a fine, upstanding man, a good, honest man, and he worked every day of his life to support, his family. And I know what kind of man he was, and I just don't believe he done anything wrong. I talked with him later in life after I grew up, and I think what he done in the line of duty. I don't think he done anything underhanded. He was protecting his life is what he was doing.
As that last statement suggests, the story that Kenny Durden got from his father is roughly the same story you've been hearing from the police and the Hoppers, with a few important differences. In Kenny Durden's version, A.C. Hall had a gun, and the shooting took place while officers Durden and Brown were chasing A.C. on foot.
The lady that the gun was stolen from, she identified the guy, and when he ran, they got in a foot pursuit with him. And that's when my dad said that he pulled the gun out, and that's when he was shot.
Right.
I really believe what he told me to be the truth, and nobody will ever make me believe otherwise, and I don't think I'm being biased just because he was my dad.
Right.
I just know him.
But now, there was something I needed to tell Kenny Durden, something he didn't know, and it concerned that report from the medical examiner.
It was when the medical examiner came in with his report, and it showed that the young man had been shot right in the back.
Then Kenny Durden repeated the version
that he'd long believed to be true, the version in which A.C. Hall precipitated the shooting. But Durden seemed to be searching for something that could explain how A.C. came to be shot in the back.
Well, my dad said that he was running and that he reached in his back pocket like he was reaching for a gun or like he was turning to shoot or something. And that's when they fired, so I don't know.
Let's not gloss over that last remark, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to make too much of this. After all, this is probably the first time Kenny Durden's ever heard a version that countered his dad's account. But he's clearly thinking about this alternative version. And then he says something that makes me wonder if he's wrestling, even struggling with this new information.
If the young man lost his life any other way than that, I'm terribly sorry. I mean, I'm sorry the young man died anyway.
So, all right.
My dad was a fine, upstanding man.
He's still upstanding. Well, he's not, actually. All right, we did go down there. The students get very involved. We retraced the steps on the 56th anniversary. We were led by Newt Collier, who grew up with him. Newt Collier, who then went on to a career playing the horns for Sam and Dave. Y'all remember them? Went to the church where A.C. Hall lived and went to church. Last clip, it's very short because I closed out the season with a student's observation here.
Aaron Akindo had a take that I found so uplifting. We'd been focusing for weeks on the tragic death of A.C. Hall, and we'd really come to like this young man. We'd focused on the horrible circumstances that led to his death. This was some really depressing stuff. Some of us were moved to tears as we walked the night before to Ash and First Streets, where he died. And then in the morning, as we stood over his gravesite, how, I wondered, do we go forward from here? How do we clear our eyes and see a path forward? As usual, a student showed the way. I'm going to let student Aaron Okindo deliver the benediction for this season of Buried Truths.
Part of me felt weird at first last night when I was at the site of his death on First Street in Ash, because I felt like I'm here because he died. But now being at the gravesite, it's like I'm here because he lived. Yeah, I'm here because he lived, and that is something that I feel like it does him a little bit of justice.
This is Buried Truths. I'm Hank Klibanoff.
Thank you, and thank you for letting me go over it. Sorry I went over time.
What I think Hank's sort of delving into the particular case just shows what is possible when you have in some ways, the luxury of working on a single case with a group of students. The archive that we've been putting together hasn't been able always, though we have sometimes, been able to give that level of attention to an individual case. But and certainly in the cases where in our archive, when we've been able to do restorative justice events, we've been able to form the kinds of relationships and have the kind of experiences that Hank has now just outlined. You're going to hear a bit more about that this afternoon when our families talk about when we've been able to be in contact with them. But I think what you can understand from our shorter pre-season and from Hank's longer exposition is that we're really good at, and we're very proud of, all of the fact-building pieces of what we do in the archive. We teach students how to investigate cases, how to look for documents, how to find documents, how to find family members, And sometimes when we're lucky and have the resources to do so, to visit them, to interview them, and to visit the sites and visit with community members who've been involved and hold the memories, who really are the memory keepers for these incidents. Now, when we were building an archive like ours, that kind of fact investigation is the key to the building of the archive. It's the hamburger that goes into what then ultimately becomes the CRRJ archive. It's the documents and it's the evidence. But I think that what all of us understand in some way is that we are also working in history, working with history, and we in certain sense have history as our client. We have the dead person as our client, but we also have history as the client. And that although our project doesn't deal with perpetrators by and large, we really have been dealing with victims and their families and their reckoning with that history. What I think I'd like to turn to the panel and ask them about is, how do you basically model that? How do you basically deal with having history as the client, with having a dead person as the client? How do you basically deal with that when then sometimes also dealing with the current family? And the current family, and how do you put those things together? What has been your experience, if you'd bring some of our experiences into the room in terms of that duality of teaching for the students and for us?
Sure, I can start and pass it to you. I think the idea of what it means to have a client is something that's really important for students to grapple with, especially in a law school, because they're going to be going out in the world and dealing with clients. And I think our context requires us to think beyond sort of the rules and guidelines that govern a formal attorney-client relationship and think more broadly about what are the ethical and moral obligations and responsibilities that we have in a relationship that we owe to the person who is deceased, even if that is not governed by a specific rule, and to think about what responsibilities, what commitments we have to that person, how we do right by them. And I think one of the things that we feel is our responsibility in CRRJ is to bring what we find back to that person's family, descendants, where we might not be able to identify them, to others in the community who might have been affected by this or hold their own memories of it, to really return that to whoever we can find who holds the living memory of it. And I think then that becomes, as you said, sort of a different kind of client or another kind of relationship that you have to navigate, where you're trying to figure out what can we provide to this family in terms of investigation? What can we provide in terms of thinking about what pathways to justice exist now? And I think navigating these difficult relationships in the absence of formal rules is a really good exercise for all of us as attorneys. And relationships are the foundation of what all of us are going to be doing, whatever job that is next. And so I think, the idea of a client is challenging in our work, and sometimes there are tensions between the different people, the different parties, the different ideas and concepts of history and the archive as our client as well. It's not always neat and clean, but I think in navigating that, we're able to do better work, and we're able to think more critically about the people we work with in the future outside of the clinic.
Yeah, I think having the students approach the work as if they're in a law firm, and as if this sheet of paper or this packet of paper that they have on this person is just the jump-off point, but they have to get to know their client more intimately. It definitely helps them approach the work with the seriousness of purpose and intent, but also having history as the client, especially with this generation. I'm being very specific, especially in the South, especially with young Black or African American students. It is very, very important for them to realize that they are living in a different time, and they absolutely need to understand the history to better understand the client, to better understand what happened to the client, because of the way that in the South we dealt with history. And it was in a very shut off kind of way. I want my child to do better. I don't want them exposed to this kind of a thing. And so a lot of times when students have these cases from certain periods, we have to go back and help them understand the period, help them understand the community's response, how the family reacted. Why didn't the family do more? Why didn't, somebody do this? Because they have not been taught that. It is not their understanding. And so it's very critical, and especially now in this virtual learning environment that we're trying to come out of, students have not had legal research like they're supposed to have at 1L or 2L. You're supposed to have legal research your first year. And so they're coming into this kind of experiential learning, having to kind of learn and unlearn the techniques that they kind of got while online learning, so that they can explore more deeply the client and the history, so that they can do justice to the investigation that they have.
The closer analogy for my class and my students is not of working in a law firm or as a lawyer, it's working as a journalist and working in a newsroom. And I taught this for a while with Professor Brett Gadsden, historian, great fellow, classically trained, and he pointed this out to me one day. He said, I'm used to delivering the history and the students give it back to me. He said, Hank, you're treating this like it's a newsroom where the students are constantly bringing in information we didn't know. I said, and isn't that great? And he actually said, yeah, actually, it's pretty great, And a remarkable number of my students have gone on to law. In fact, someone in this picture, she's just a little out of the picture, Ariana Murray is a 2L here. And I really hope I'll keep encouraging her to sign up here, So I would say that we are teaching history because I want my students to understand the power of history, and it's not all about the gotcha, catching the culprit. You want the culprit, you want to name him, you want to give his sordid, history and all of that, and then just put it out there. I will also say probably one of the most influential nights of my life was when we did a big event at the Atlanta History Center after the first podcast, and we brought Dorothy Nixon there, okay? It's 400 people have crammed into this auditorium in McElreath Hall, and they have never seen her, right? They're listening on earbuds. They're listening on a podcast. There's no visual, even though many of my generations come up to me now and said, I'm sorry, I haven't had a chance to watch your podcast yet. And I said, well, you're going to have to wait a long time before you can do that. And so I introduced Dorothy. And here's Dorothy. She came out, I'm telling you, she got the longest standing ovation I've ever seen given anybody. Because these people felt like they knew her and they loved her. And then she and I just cried for the next 5 minutes and couldn't get, that to me was important. One last thing, if I might. After we discovered the gravesite, okay, we went back there about a month later with Dorothy so we could show her. She kneeled and she touched her father's name there and ran her fingers over it and then cried into her son's shoulder, and we, it was a very emotional, unscripted day. She gave a beautiful little talk. She turned to my students and thanked them. They happened to be all female, and she said, so I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. And then there was this long pause, and I'm so glad you always keep the camera rolling, always keep the video, the audio rolling, the recorder rolling. She says, you all have to invite me to your weddings, okay? And I thought that was sweet. After that, we get a call from somebody who says, I am the nephew of the men who shot that guy, who shot Isaiah Nixon. Who can I talk to? And I said to the students, call him back and find out who he is. And they did. They said, he wants to apologize. And he was serious. I talked to him just to make sure, because he happened to be living, and of all the lousy gin joints in the world, he lived in Jacksonville, Florida also. where she lived, okay? So, and I went to Dorothy. She says, I don't know if I'm ready. And I said, well, I understand that. I said, we're going to go down and we're going to interview him. She says, well, you let me know. And if you and Ellie, the student who actually found the gravesite, if you tell me he's okay, I'll meet with him. And she did. And it was just lovely. It's just lovely. They're meeting in her home where he walks in and he says to her, can I give you a hug? And it went from there. So it was a lovely, and that's all on the podcast. But so that was a restorative justice of a beautiful nature, I thought.
Our students live for moments like that. And our students have experienced moments like that in doing this work. So that in addition to the fact investigative interviewing skills that they have learned in compiling our archive, in addition to the moments of contact with families, creation of relationships with families, and helping bring those moments that they get to witness to being, we also have in our class to deal with the emotional impact of working on these cases for them and for the classroom experience. And this is not for any moment, not for a moment, to in any way put the students' emotional experience on the same level as what it is for the families to be contacted by us and know and own their own histories in a different kind of way. But as teachers, we need to be really conscious of what the emotional impact is of the work that we're doing on the classroom, but also the benefit of creating the emotional space in a, let's say, a law school class, to have those kinds of conversations that there always isn't space for in an academic institution. So one of the things that I think we've been very conscious of in our clinic work is understanding, while still respecting the boundaries of appropriate relationships, to be a place where those things can be discussed between and among students and with us as teachers. So there are things we'd want to talk about in terms of what dealing with this work does, in terms of the relationship to how students understand today by virtue of working in the history that they're discussing. That how they experience today's news by virtue of the work that we do in history. But our time's over, and I didn't have a chance to get any of you to give comments. And so therefore, we're gonna have a pedagogy conference, basically, so that we can explore all of these questions in much more detail, give them the attention they deserve, and bring them not only to the journalism environment and to the law environment, although we could do such work in the world if we could bring these clinics all around the country, but to talk about what is different between teaching history and working in history for historians, and what it would be like to be a sociologist and bring the sociologist's view of it and the economist's view of it, because this is how, because people migrated and ran for their lives, we have a wealth gap in this country that is traceable to this kind of Jim Crow violence. And what we could learn basically about psychology and intergenerational trauma from the data that is now present in the archive. So none of this would have happened without the students that we're lauding, celebrating, and discussing how to teach them better from here on and into the future. And thank you. Thank you to our panelists.